Join the Santa Clarita Valley Veterans Memorial Committee at Eternal Valley Cemetery for a Memorial Day tribute to our veterans, current and past. The tribute includes a flyover, the ROTC drill team, and music from the Santa Clarita Valley Concert Band. Afterward, gather at the Veterans Memorial Wall for a reading of the more than 800 names.
The life of this conditional use permit would be how long?
It'll be with the project site, just like any other CUP.
Why was there a 25-year limit on the first one?
The County of Los Angeles actually issued that in their original approval and conditions. It wasn't stated for an exact reason why there was an expiration. Mm-hmm. Just talking to some of the other planners who have kind of predated myself, they said that it wasn't unusual for the counties to go ahead and issue CUPs with an expiration.
Okay. Perhaps they took into account the possibility of construction or something. I don't know. Another question I've got, though, is on that approach and departure corridor that you showed.
Yes.
It seems not to be in agreement with the word description on the California DOT heliport permit, in that there they say the approved departure courses are 245 degrees clockwise at 280 degrees magnetic, 300 degrees clockwise to 045 degree magnetic. That means you can't depart to the southeast with this permit, but yet we showed the approach and departure corridor in the southeast quadrant.
That was a preferred takeoff and landing. If you want the applicant to further clarify that question that you have.
Yeah, I would like clarification on that one when the applicant gets an opportunity, please. That's all I have. Thanks.
Did anyone else catch that?
Just the pilot, I think.
Any other questions of staff? Yeah.
Yes, along the lines with the timing on this, and that this will go with the property. I noticed in the conditions of approval on handwritten page 11, PL5, that that any expansion of this would have to be would require written approval by the Director of Community Development. So my question is, what triggers a review by the director versus an entirely new submittal for a new CUP? It reads, the applicant is restricted from expanding the existing helipad in size and operation without written approval from the Director of Community Development.
Commissioner Trotman, I believe we have requirements in the code that if it's below 10%, be done administratively, and I think there's a percentage like 25 or 30%. It goes up to back up to the Planning Commission. I don't have the code with us, but it can reflect back to the code. We have different thresholds as far as what can be done administratively and what has to be taken back to the Planning Commission.
So that's typical for other projects too, not just something of this nature?
Correct.
Yeah, it's the same threshold determination you have between MUP and CUP. A minor use permit versus a conditional use permit is usually the standard, but if you want to be explicit, we could say as set forth in the code.
Let's do that so it's clear at least,
okay.
So everyone knows what that trigger is. Okay, I'd like it amended, thanks.
Any other questions of staff before we? Okay, the applicant is obviously SCE, and Tony Wilson. Tony, do you mind coming up and answering the question? If Tony's, Tony, that Commissioner Kennedy had?
I'm really not going to answer the question. I'm just going to introduce the guy that will answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Art Bradbury is our manager of aircraft operations, and so he'll be able to answer that question for you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, the approach and departures are spelled out by the state of California. They come out with their inclinometers and they map where you have an 8-to-1 clear zone, and that's what they give you to make your approach and departure path. Sometimes it's not uncommon for us to have a wide open approach and departure path, but to actually pinpoint what we consider a preferred one for communities or forced landing areas or anything like that that we are addressing the public safety on. So we've picked that as the least obtrusive approach and departure path in and out of that area for the surrounding community. And it should be consistent. Now, I don't have my compasses and everything, but that path should still be consistent with the approach and departure azimuths that they state in there.
But it's not, quite frankly, because the
Can
approved.
we have that picture back up of the?
You can put the picture up if you want. But I'm reading from the heliport permit now, and it says approved departure courses are 245 degree clockwise at 280 degrees magnetic and 300 degrees clockwise, 3045 magnetic, which means the only approved departures that California DOT has given on this is in the northwest quadrant and northeast quadrant. So this is okay according to that permit for arrival, because you're arriving from the southeast, but according to the permit, you can only depart to the northwest or northeast. How do we reconcile that?
But could I see that copy?
Sure.
Oh, you got it? Oh, is it in the body of that?
That was August 2005 approval date. Quite frankly, from my perspective, I like your departure corridor better, but to be legal,
I can help a little
in
bit.
accordance with a permit, we have to
Originally,
fix it.
when the state approved this, the guy that came down and did this put in the wrong coordinates.
That's just what I'm looking here. This.
And that letter that was a part of our package. There's part of our package telling the state that. So we can probably pull that out for you also.
Okay, but I think the critical issue here is that they have to correct it before you can legally operate, correct?
I think, and it says here that departures courses will be on those, and then it also says approaches on reciprocal bearings. So the reciprocal is just a reverse of that 180 out. So
I understand that, but it only authorizes approaches on the reciprocal bearing, not departures. It specifies what the departure bearings will be. See my point?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense because they clear an 8-to-1, and that's.
It'd be good both ways.
That's for the performance of the aircraft, not and keeping things clear for the performance issues. That's a good point. We'll go back to the state and clarify that. We can offer that back to the staff if you'd like to.
Okay. I would prefer it be done that way because I don't want to put this commission in a position, if we approve this tonight,
Sure.
that we're approving something that's contrary to what the State Department of Transportation has already authorized.
Right.
Then we'll get into a potential hassle between city and state. Very good.
Well, the commission's action tonight to approve is to approve the conditional use permit for use of the helipad. This exhibit that you're looking at on the wall is simply for illustration purposes demonstrating a preferred alternative approach and departure by the applicant. But your conditional use permit doesn't limit the direction of approach or departure.
So we could
All right.
just make a condition of approval that they operate it per the requirements of the Department of Transportation.
You could make
And
that a
then
condition of
however they
approval.
resolve
They
that
have to
between
do
them,
that
they're good.
anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
And-
you don't really need it as a condition of approval. They're limited in any event.
And that's addressed in PL4 if you look on the draft conditions.
Ms. Bradbury, you had filled out a speaker slip. Would you like to say anything else besides that tonight?
No, we were just instructed to identify ourselves with that in
Right.
case you had any questions of us.
Perfect.
See, I mean, it is addressed in PL4, and thank you, Mr. Killebrew, in terms of the conditions that will be put on this approval tonight. So truly, in order to operate in that corridor on departure, you're going to have to get it changed.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, we can certainly do that.
Good, okay.
Good catch.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
I have a
Mr.
question.
Kennedy?
Sure. With regard to the 8-to-1 clearance gradient for arrivals and departures, then it's safe to say that your permit for operation will be retracted if any construction occurs in that approach or departure corridor that hits the threshold of the 8-to-1 gradient coming out, correct?
We've already had to adjust on other helipads. That's why they give a wide area in case there is some obstruction that comes up in the meantime. Or we have to secure a navigational easement for those areas that would involve other landowners.
From a perspective then of the city, and I'll ask this to City Council, do we need to have a condition of approval in here now that if any construction hits that clear zone, that we have to revisit this? Is
Again,
that reasonable?
Again, our concern is this a land use that's consistent with the area, and have we mitigated the impacts on surrounding land uses? With respect to how they have to approach and any regulations they have to comply with in the air, that's really within the jurisdiction of the county and or the FAA. So
Well,
I don't know that we need to worry about the construction in immediate or in adjacent areas unless you're concerned about there being impacts on those surrounding uses that we would want to mitigate.
I'm concerned from a couple of angles. One is safety, and the other one is noise in that area. So if we build up into that approach corridor, we're putting people potentially in harm's way. And secondly, there's probably going to be more noise on those buildings down there. So that's one concern I've got. Another concern I've got is the use of this heliport. If I vote in approval of it tonight, I'm going to vote in approval of it for normal usage. But over time, if this goes with the life of the property, things change, and people maybe tend to forget the original reason for approval. And I think that's why it's important to have the right conditions of approval written up front. For example, I would not like to see this used for training or for in-flight emergency approach procedures, like auto-rotating landings, because it is in very embedded within a populated area, albeit an industrial zone. It's still populated during the day when we're going to be conducting flight operations in and out of here. Those are reasonable conditions, are they not?
Well, but if you're doing unless you're doing an auto-rotating training exercise, if you're in an auto-rotating situation, you're going to land.
No, I said for training.
Okay.
Emergency training.
Right.
But anyway.
Yeah, certainly you could put that restriction on it if you felt it was appropriate.
Well, I presume I know the answer. Do you intend to use this site for training?
No.
Yeah. We don't now. But as we saw already with the first conditional use permit approval, over 25 years, people forgot. I think what the original basis was, even forgot that it needed to be renewed. So, and then now we're into this situation, now we have to revisit it. So I'm concerned that if we're going to construct this for the long term, that includes a generation or two generations downstream, are going to have to understand what the sense of this commission was in approving this. And that's why I think it's important to get a lot of this into writing in the conditions of approval, so that we memorialize the ideas and sense, in the document.
So at this point, you're suggesting two conditions. One, that it not be used for training. And the second, that to the extent that other structures are constructed in the vicinity that would intersect that 8-to-1 clearance area, that would give rise to an opportunity to revisit this permit for additional conditioning.
Correct. Because under that circumstance, then we'd have to readdress the approach and departure corridors to make them in clear. So I would propose PL9. Helipad to be used for normal flight operations and no flight training. And PL10 in the event of construction in excess, or which violates the 8-to-1 clearance gradients of the approach and departure corridor occurs, then they have to come back and revisit it. So those two is what I would propose. From the applicant's perspective, feel free to comment on that if you want.
No, like I said, we already recognize the navigational aspect of it, and we're working with our public affairs people to try to secure some navigational easements to secure the preferred approach and departure paths.
For a second. Obviously, that's the main point there. We would like to maintain our that helipad because it's a vital key in maintaining our distribution and transmission lines. And of course, we don't want to be worrying a year from now thinking that you're going to build an 8-story building right next to it, and then that gets rid of our helipad. So I don't know how you're thinking that, you're saying that any new project would override our heliport, or what? How are you proposing this?
Well, from my perspective, and it's just my perspective, it doesn't reflect the sense of the commission yet because we haven't discussed it or voted on it. But from my perspective, I would not be inclined to want to approve the helipad as a heliport and then protect that approach corridor in perpetuity to the detriment of other property owners that underlie that approach and departure corridor.
I understand that. I just
Okay.
want an even playing field here. It would sound almost like, any incursion by a builder would sacrifice the heliport. I mean, there is a benefit to the public for this heliport, not only for our transmission lines, but the city can use it for emergency landings too if it wants to. So it's available for that. So we wanted you to keep that in mind. We're a public service for the community, and that's a definite key point for us maintaining. We have a large conglomeration of transmission lines and transmission lines specifically coming down through this area, as you know. And so this is a very key point for us, and so we would like to make that important to you in your consideration of anything else that might happen there. And at least give us an even keel in protecting it, and on you understanding that it's important to be protected.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree, Mr. Wilson, and I also think there's a lot of latitude here. Because of the heliport approval, gives you pretty wide latitude in adjusting those corridors and into other quadrants should construction occur.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's fine, and that's a great point, and you can see why why Mr. Badbury is saying that we do have a latitude in how we do fly. But we appreciate your consideration and all that.
Thanks again, gentlemen. Comments on this? Diane, you have a puzzled face?
No, I just want to make sure that we are clear about the purpose of that condition. So would you mind clarifying again, Bill, what you're aiming for with your addition of PL10?
which one, 10?
PL10, mm-hmm.
On the construction?
Right.
Sure. The applicant is talking about an approach gradient, which is the aircraft are going to come in to that helipad at an angle like this down there. What if somebody builds a building right here that protrudes into that protected glide path of that approaching aircraft? Now it's not a safe approach anymore, number one. And then number two is there'll be more noise to the tenants or the occupants of that building that are in the upper floors.
So you're talking about people on other properties
Yes,
building,
yes,
okay,
right through here. In other words, we can't guarantee necessarily protection of that corridor in perpetuity, is what I'm saying. So if it changes, then we have to make sure that my concern is that when we approve this, that one of the conditions was that was going to be a free and clear corridor for approaches and departures. That becomes not to be the case, then, I would not want to be in a position to say, well, yeah, it's still okay to use it.
okay, so could you restate your motion so that we know that they are also protected, so that they have at least some other options? And because what if all the surrounding properties were to decide they're going to build 8- and 9-story buildings and eliminate all of the flight paths that are possible?
I don't know that would be the case, frankly. I mean, most of this in the other quadrants, I think the property there is Southern Cal Edison property, correct?
Well, I think we need to make two things clear. First thing is that your granting of this CUP is not the grant of an easement, a permanent easement over adjacent property. So if I'm the next door neighbor and I have a right under the code to build to 80 feet tall or whatever, the fact that their flight path may intersect that's their problem, not mine. You can't limit my 80-foot construction because they want to fly a helicopter through it. That's not what you're approving tonight. Okay, and the second thing is that in terms of noise impacts that you're concerned about, they're a user of the property just like any other user in the city, and they have to comply with the city's noise standards. So to the extent there are noise impacts on a building that gets built adjacent to them that wasn't there today when you approved this, they're still going to have to comply with the noise standards. So, I mean, we could measure the noise at the property line today and make a determination as to whether or not they're in compliance with the noise standard, or we could wait till there's a building there. Either way, they still have to comply with the city's noise standards. So I think that the condition that you are advocating is kind of already addressed by the code, but if you want to make it more express so everybody's on notice that future construction on surrounding properties may impact their flight path, that's fine.
Okay, well then, that's what I'm asking for. What's the clarification on what the appropriate condition is for this?
Well, and I think the condition he was advocating was that to the extent that construction occurs that intersects with the 8-to-1 glide path, that presents an opportunity for the commission to impose additional conditions as appropriate to mitigate the impacts.
Thank you.
I have a question. How else would this be handled? In other words, if we didn't have this condition and someone did build a building there?
Well, if somebody built the building there, there'd be two things that happen. First, based on the statements made by the applicant, it appears they would have to potentially go to their licensing agency and get a modification or a clarification on their flight path, because they have to maintain this 8-to-1 ratio, and if there's a building there, they can no longer do it. So that would be the first thing. With respect to noise, you might get complaints from the developer saying, hey, it's really noisy here, we need to look at this, and at that point you'd have to do some noise studies to figure out whether the noise is in excess or is exceeding the thresholds that are allowed by the code. So CUP is not authorization to violate the city's code.
Okay, further discussion? Someone like to make a motion? What's the pleasure of the commission?
I'd like to move that we go with the staff's recommendation.
Second.
With amendments?
No,
Do-
I didn't.
No?
I don't know if that's really necessary. I think it's really already handled, and my concern is if you get too definitive, then you may definitivize your way out of where your ballpark type thing. It doesn't make any. I think it's already handled.
So we have a motion and a second. I'd like to close the public hearing and add more comment if necessary. Commissioner Kennedy?
I just have a concern that there not be any misunderstanding, because what I heard from the applicant was kind of the expectation that this would be somewhat protected for them for the future, so for their planning. And I just want to make sure that, that
Well,
misperception.
Yeah, this is a conditional use permit, and I guess there's lots of conditions in a conditional use permit, and if they comply with all the conditions all the time, then it does give them that amount of certainty that they can use it. And I think if a building is built there, that kind of defies one of the conditions if they do things that are unsafe. There's lots of other codes that handle safety, I think, and I think that what we're just determining is whether this is consistent with the land use right now. And if it becomes inconsistent, then the condition probably no longer is there. And someone's going to tell us, and we'll rule on that then, right?
Well, yes, but I think the issue that Commissioner Kennedy is raising is one of notice, and making sure that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, there isn't a question, or there isn't a debate, or there's less of a debate about whether it was reasonable for the user of the helipad to expect they could continue to use it without any further restrictions, no matter what happened around them. And I think that that's what he's driving at, is even if we can address this through other means, through the code, et cetera, putting a condition in there may also give notice to the applicant over time.
Said in a nutshell.
And the same thing would apply to the training too, because these are things that are not necessarily codified in terms of the helipad use, so it would just be clarifying what the uses are with this permit. And then if there was a change, if they wanted to do training at some point or whatever, that would be something for discussion that would trigger a reevaluation.
I guess then if we think that there's a chance for a building that size, I mean, I guess there's always a chance, so that'd be part of the boilerplate then, I guess, of the conditional use permit. we have a height limitation of 35 feet. I know we allowed a 6-story building. I just hate to see paper used for a lot of things. I guess it's okay. I just, I can think of a lot of other things that put in. I understand what he's saying, but that gives it a certain elevation of importance or likelihood as any other thing, which could be a safety issue or a use issue. And I think that the conditional use permit code just implicitly deals with that, or our system deals with that. And if we handle that one, then maybe we should be looking at other things we can be handling too, is kind of what I'm thinking.
Commissioner Ostrom, there is a provision in the conditional use permit portion of the Unified Development Code that talks about changed circumstances and the ability of the city to reevaluate CUPs that have been granted based on changed circumstances. So that provision is there. It is built into the provisions of that specific entitlement.
Yeah, and I think that's a good provision in the CUP. I think what your concern is a valid concern, but I think they're duplicated. If we don't think they're duplicated, then we can have a vote on that, I guess. I don't know.
Well, we do have a motion and we have a second. Any other discussion? I think this is an item that Commissioner Kennedy and Commissioner Troutman, if you have a problem with it or about just the motion, why don't we talk about it before we vote? If there is.
Well, what I had asked for was just adding some wording that referred back to the Unified Development Code and PL5. So that was the only thing that I was asking for in terms of an amendment. I understand both points of view. Commissioner Kennedy is asking to have something more specific to this particular project that would clarify the intent.
Is the motion that was on the floor, did that take into consideration your PL5?
No, it didn't.
Okay.
It didn't take into consideration
Okay.
any requested. So I think if it were a really, really complex request, that I would say, well, I don't think we need that. But I think I don't think it hurts to clarify in a document that pertains to any given project the specifics of that project versus referring something back to a Unified Development Code that has generalized language. But, either way, I'm not terribly concerned about this. I just think that it always helps to have additional clarity.
One last question on that PL5. Can you, because it was not in the motion, can you tell us what you wanted to add to that motion?
It was simply going to say the applicant is restricted from expanding the existing helipad in size and operation without written approval from the Director of Community Development as set forth in the Unified Development Code.
Yeah, I'll just ask the question, if you don't mind here. That would that be acceptable for the motion you made in the second?
Well, I have a real problem with that. I'm a graduate of Edison, and in 1994 we had an earthquake, and they expanded the helicopter operations there in an emergency setting. As long as they can deal with that, that's fine. But typically the helicopters fly solo. I remember back in 1994, on the day of the earthquake, we had 4 helicopters on the site.
Okay, so then you don't want to change your motion. I understand.
I don't want to change it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Can I please call for a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Ostrom,
Yes.
Commissioner Troutman,
Yes.
Commissioner Kennedy,
Yes.
Commissioner Burkhart,
Yes.
Chair Berger.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Mr. Killebrew, thank you for your time. Okay, next up, we get to hear from our planning manager, Ms. Weber, welcome back.
Thank you, Chair Weber. Good evening, Commissioners. A few items for you tonight, just an update for you on some City Council-related items. At our last City Council meeting, the Housley Hills Annexation Project was presented to the City Council, and that was passed through in its first reading. We have a second reading of that ordinance coming up before the City Council at their next meeting, which is next week. Also going up to the City Council next week is an appeal of a project that came before the Planning Commission. This is the Mandalay Road single-family residence and detached garage project with the driveway access off of Mandalay. If you remember, there was an issue related to a slope failure that's occurring on an adjacent property where they share a flag strip. And it was determined here at this Planning Commission meeting that there really was no nexus between those two matters, and the Commission did approve that. That is now being appealed up to the City Council. Also, we are launching several environmental impact report processes. We just last Monday, a week ago, Monday, held the North Newhall Specific Plan Stage 1 scoping meeting, and that was held over at the Activity Center. And this is a little bit of a different project for us. It's a Stage 1 EIR, which means that it's very limited in scope. It's really just focusing on the extension of Dockweiler Drive over the railroad tracks at Lyons Avenue, and looking at a at-grade rail crossing there with the closure of 13th Street just to the north of that location. The reason why we're doing this focused type of EIR is because the city needs to submit an application to the Public Utilities Commission, which is the agency that determines whether a at-grade rail crossing closure and opening can occur. And in order for them to make a determination, an environmental impact report is required. So we're really just focusing on that. We're really not getting into all of the additional detail of infrastructure and land use associated with a future North Newhall Specific Plan project. Really, that's premature until we understand what type of access we have into that area. So that's what's happening there. This coming Thursday, we have another scoping meeting to kick off the EIR process for the Sand Canyon Joint Venture Project. This is a project that came before the Planning Commission and City Council a number of years ago. This project's applicant, Tom Clark, has modified this project significantly to create a more of a horizontal mixed-use type development that does include retail at the corner of Sand Canyon Road and Soledad with an office component and also a single-family and multifamily residential component with pedestrian and vehicular trail connections throughout. So we're looking forward to that project, and that will be coming to you later this year. Also, at your next Planning Commission meeting, May 20th, that is your regularly scheduled study session evening. In lieu of a study session, we will be taking you out to tour the Master's College property and other related developments in that immediate vicinity, which will be included as part of the Master's College Master Plan EIR. That EIR is nearly ready for your review and for the public 45-day circulation period. It will be introduced to the Commission with a project overview and an EIR overview on July 1st. But we'd like to get you out there in May, introduce you, and then we'll be releasing the EIR shortly thereafter in June. And I believe that concludes my report. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Planning Management Report, thank you. Planning Commissioners Reports. Commissioner Kennedy.
Nothing.
Commissioner Burkhart.
Nada.
Rostrom.
Nothing.
Drummond, nothing, okay. Maggie, do we have anything from the public tonight? No public comment tonight? Okay, then I'll introduce a adjournment motion if somebody would like.
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, meeting adjourned.
was trying to get everything done before the party, the decorations and the cake and the balloons and everything, and I was rushing. Carlos was rushing like mad, and I turned around just for 1 second, and there was a really loud whistle. I slammed on the brakes, the cake went flying, the train came. I was scared.
Look, listen, and live, or someone you love will get hurt.
Sweetheart, you're safe.